And welcome, and we'll say the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And by way of introduction for today, I have to say that these parts of Deuteronomy and the Torah are very difficult for me. We are talking here about a situation where someone is seducing another Israelite to believe in an idol, to take them away from their faith in God. And the consequences are disastrous. They are very, very harsh indeed. And in fact, we talk about the Ir Hanidacha. That's a term we use, which refers to a city where the inhabitants are go and worship idols, and where the city itself, where all the inhabitants are killed, man, woman, child, are all destroyed, the animals are destroyed, the cities laid waste, etc.
What
And
about what about the innocent people of that city?
well, I would hope that they are removed. Remember, the Torah is talking in large strokes, Harlan. I mean, of course, it's a wonderful question you're asking. Um, the problem is that it's hard to remain innocent when you're staying within a group of wicked people, and you become sometimes an accessory as well.
Oh,
The Talmud, I'm sure, talks about this and goes into these kinds of questions that you just asked. But here we're dealing with very broad strokes. Um, and I find these passages very, very, very difficult. And what I try to, the positive element that I try to get out of is that at least not to consider as benign walking away from being faithful and loyal to our Creator, and to walking away from, you know, the special relationship that God has with the Jewish people, and the history that we have behind it, etc. But on the other hand, I feel that, we want to try and be kind and show kindness and display kindness, and try to show people the beauty and the depth and compassion of Judaism. And for these kinds of passages, I see it more as a warning to myself, and not so much to point fingers elsewhere. But it is difficult stuff, and we need to do it anyway. So here we are. Ki yisidcha achicha, if your brother, ben imecha, the son of your mother, or vincha, or your son, or vitcha, or your daughter, or eshet chekecha, or the wife of your bosom, or reacha, or your friend, asher kenafshecha, who is like your soul. In other words, your closest friend, the Seder secretly, they more saying, and this is Yasidcha, I didn't translate, but you can see I wrote it up here, to entice you, to try to seduce you. Necha v'na'avda Elohim acharim. Let's go and worship and serve other gods. Asher lo yadata, that you've never experienced or know of. Ata, you, nor your ancestors, v'avotecha. So you can see what's being set up right now. So, ki yesitcha, ein hasata, that's the noun. Yesitcha is the verb, ein hasata, ela girui. So what we're talking about is incitement, right? This to stir up. Shinemar, as it says, and this is the first book of Samuel, chapter 26, ki im Hashem hesitcha bi. So this, I didn't look at the context of this, right? Ki im Hashem could mean unless the Lord had incited you or stirred you up against me. So it's the context, at least, if I'm translating this correctly, would be, you wouldn't have hated me so much. I could conceive of this as David saying this to Saul, and saying to Saul, whom he knew wanted to kill him, that I know that deep in your own soul, Saul, you don't hate me, but that this is something that's part of your illness. It would be a way of saying this is part of the illness that you're experiencing. At any rate, I am speculating. French word, right? Amitre or something. Emitre? And the Safaria had this French word that it mentioned, Balaz in French, and Anreizen, right? Anreizen, Yiddish, related to German, obviously, which means to stir up. Shemisiu lasot chen. So that he induces him to do this. He's putting pressure on him, or he's trying to entice him. Achicha, so because it says achicha, that would be son, Rashi tells you, me'av, from your father. And then he puts in or ben imecha, right? He puts in the word or here, or the son of your mother. Of course, that means from the mother. And I think the issue going on here is it just says, if you just read it, Achecha ben imecha, it means your brother, son of your mother. Well, what's about the son of your father? Right? It would seem to leave it out. And the way the Talmud and how Rashi now is citing, is analyzing it, is to include both. That the Achicha means son of your father, and ben imecha means son of your mother. So, and he gives you the reference in Kiddushin, page 86. Chekecha, right? Your bosom. Hashochevet, who lies. Bechekcha, in your lap or in your bosom. Machazika becha, and she attaches herself to you. And here's the French word, apparently affiche. It doesn't look like that in the Hebrew, I must tell you, but it could be that the way Rashi is using the Hebrew or to do the French, there's certain conventions of the Hebrew that are not the way we normally read Hebrew. And in the Yiddish again, anhongend, right? There you see the word hanging, so hanging on. And we have a similar situation, similar interpretation in Ezekiel chapter 43, umechek haaretz, right? Which would mean and going on to say, mi yisud hatakua ba'aretz. Now, this has to be Rashi's interpretation of mechek haaretz. In other words, literally, it would mean the bosom of the earth. And Rashi translates that as from the foundation that is stuck into the earth. Asher kenachshecha, who is like your own soul. Ze avicha, this is referring to your father. Piresh lacha katuv, the verse is explaining to you et hachavivim lacha, right? Since it's saying to you that what it means here is that the text is specifying to you et hachavivim lacha, those that are close to you, those who you love, the ones who are beloved by you. Kal vachomer la'achayrim. So it doesn't need to mention the others, because you could draw an inference that if these very closest people to you, this happens, and the consequences that the Torah is going to mention apply, then it certainly applies to people who are not so beloved by you. Beseter, secretly. Diber hakatuv behoveh. He says Scripture is just speaking about the way things normally happen. In other words, it isn't that this is a condition. In other words, that if he talks to you openly, it's okay. It just mentions this because that's the way it usually happens. She'ein divrei masit ela beseter, because generally speaking, the one who's entitled, the words of the one who's enticing take place in secret, because he knows he's telling you to do something wrong. And we know that we tend to try to hide our bad behavior. V'chein Shlomo Omer, right? And likewise, Solomon himself said, and this is in Proverbs, of course, one of the books attributed to Solomon on chapter 7, by Nefesh, by Neshef in the twilight, by Erev at nightfall, Yom, Be'erev Yom. That's a phrase, right? At the end of the day. Be'ishun Laila, in the blackness of light, va'afela, and darkness. So this again in Mishlei, very often it's talking about immoral behavior, that it takes place at that time. Asher lo yadata ata va'avotecha, right? So this is referring to a God which you never, basically it could mean experienced or ever heard of, you nor your ancestors. Davar ze gnai gadol. This expression or this matter is one of great indicates degradation. Lacha, for you. In other words, that you should do such a thing. She'af ha'umot, because if you look at the other nations, those nations, they actually worship idols. Ein manichim ma shemasru lahem avotechem. They don't set aside what their ancestors taught them or passed on to them. V'zeh omer lacha, and this one's saying to you, Azov ma shemasru lacha avotecha. He's saying to you, set aside what your ancestors have taught you or what your fathers have taught you. So it's again an expression of showing how awful this really is. So, or at least trying to get across. Me Elohei ha'amim, in other words, these gods, the gods of the nations, asher sevivotechem, which surround you, hakrovim elecha, those that are near to you, o harichukim mimeka, or those who are distant from you, miktsei haaretz, from one end of the earth, va'ad ktsei haaretz, to the other end of the earth. Hakrovim elecha or hachukim, those near to you or those distant. And the interpretation that we find in the tractate Sanhedrin, that's page 61. Lama prat krovim urechokim. Why does he specify those near and those far? Elakach hamar hakatuv. But this is what scripture, what the verse wants to convey. Metivan shel krovim, from the nature of the ones that are close. Atal lomed tivan shel rechokim. You will learn, you will understand, or you will deduce the nature of those that are distant. Keshem she'ein mamash bekrovim, as there's no substance to the ones that are close. Kach ein mamash berechokim, so there is no substance to those that are distant. Miktsei haaretz, from one edge of the earth. And this is from the Sifrei, right? The halachic midrash on Numbers at Deuteronomy. Zo chama ulevana. This is referring to the sun and the moon, utzva hashamayim, and the host of heaven. Shehein mahalchin misof haolam v'ad sofo. Why? Because they traverse one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, or one end of the universe to the other end of the universe. At least the stars certainly would appear to do so. Okay. But again, if you're looking at it from the point of view of the earth, then they would appear to do that. Going on. Lo tovelo, you should not favor this person. Velo tishma alav, you shall not pay attention to what he's saying. Velo tachos einecha alav, you should show no pity on him, right? Your eyes should show no pity over him. Velo tachmo, you shall not have mercy, v'lo techaseh alav, and you shall not, literally it means cover up over him, cover up on him. So let's take a look. Lo tovelo means lo tehe ta'av lo, you shall not show any desire for him. He should not appear to be desirable to you. Lo ta'avenu, you shall not love him, show him love. Lefi shenemar, as it states in Leviticus 19, that even though it says v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, where it says you shall love your neighbor as yourself, et ze lo te'ehav. This one you cannot show love to. And of course, we're getting right into the area where I find it extremely challenging. Not that I think one should love this particular individual, or certainly not their opinions, but as it goes on to say, to show no mercy, etc. And it's just very difficult. Again, if we see it as the Torah, challenging us personally and looking into ourselves and not allowing ourselves to be seduced by our own desires or our own lack of understanding, perhaps, right? That we really have to fight it. V'lo tishma alav, right? Right? You should not listen to him. V'hit chanano al nafsho, where he supplicates you regarding his life, limcholo, to forgive him, right? To show mercy to him. Lefi shenamar, and why does this have to be stated is the way Rashi's putting it. In other words, why does this need to be stated? Because back in Exodus 23, it says, Azov ta'azov imo, which says, you shall, we actually did this verse, should you refrain from helping him? No, you should absolutely help him. Lazeh lo ta'azov. This one, you should not do that, right? You should not overlook what he's doing. V'lo tachos einecha alav, you shall not show any pity on him. Lefi shenemar, and again, Rashi's saying it's an interesting sort of idea that because the reverse is said elsewhere, that's why the Torah has a need to say it here, so that we realize that there's an exceptional case and that these are exceptional cases. Again, not making it any easier. Lefi shenemar, and the reason is because it states in Leviticus 19, Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, you shall not stand by the blood of your neighbor, al zeh lo tachus. This one you can show no pity to. Really, really challenging. V'lo tachmo, you shall show him no mercy, lo tahafoch bizchuto. This one you don't try to figure out and think through ways to show that he's really worthy. V'lo techaseh alav, right? We said this means you shouldn't cover up on him. Im ata yodea lo chova. If in fact you know for certain that this person is guilty, eincha rashai lashtok, you have no right, you have no permission to be quiet, to be silent over it. To give you a sort of a similarity is this law of when you are I don't remember the exact term for it, but for example, if you're working at a school and you know of a parent who's being abusive to a child, you are not allowed, you will be held accountable if you don't report it. Right. So it's the kind of, I think the term is some sort of reporter. And
Mandatory reporter.
say that again.
Mandatory reporting.
That's right. So that's what this is. Thanks, Lauren. This is mandatory reporting. He harog tahargenu, but you shall certainly put him to death. Yadcha tiyeh bo barishona. Your hand should be against him to begin with, lahamito, to kill him. V'yad kol ha'am b'acharana, and the hand or the agency of all the people following you. Wow. Ki harog tahargeno, but you shall certainly put him to death. Im yatsa mi beit din zakai, hachazireu lefova. Wow. And it's in parentheses, which means it is not necessarily considered an accurate text. But what it does mean is if he went out of the trial innocent, you should make sure he goes back on the possibility that he is in fact guilty. So, normally we say a person's innocent until proved guilty. In this kind of case, it's just the difference. Let me keep going and then I'll try and comment a little bit more. Yatsami Beit Din Chayav. So this is if he went out of, this is different, right? If he went out of the court held liable, Al Tachsirehu Lischut, do not send him back to prove his innocence. Now that is actually what usually happens. In other words, normally in a capital case, even if the trial has determined that the person is guilty of a capital offense, he has any opportunity, if he can think of something that might allow him to prove his innocence, or at least to not be put to death, he is taken back to the Beit Din, to the court, to examine that thing. In other words, any possibility that he actually might be innocent is taken advantage of. But in this particular case, it isn't. And so that certainly is much more in line with how we normally judge these cases. Yadcha tiyeh bo barishona. Your hand should be against him. Your hand should strike the first blow, in other words. Mitzvah bayad hanisat lahamito. Okay, so it is a mitzvah, right? So hanisat. Oh, right. This is, in other words, remember this all started out by saying if you are incited by this person. So what it's saying is it is a requirement for the one who is actually incited, right, to kill him. He has to do it. Lo mate bayado, and if he is not killed by his agency, yamut ba'ayad acherim, then others need to make sure that he's put to death. Shinemar b'yad kol ha'am, because it goes on to say, and the hand of all the people. So you can think of cases of possible abuse, right? And yet at the same time, what is this really saying? Let's go on a little bit more, just to finish off, see if I can get to the end of this portion. Uskalto ba'avanim v'amet, you shall stone him with stones so that he dies. I do need to explain that if you study the Talmud, you'll see that is not, it sounds like he was being pelted. That is not the way it was done. Essentially, the way it was done was the person was first strangled so that he was unconscious. And then, in other words, as quickly as possible, he would be unconscious. He was set over the side of a cliff and would be lying there at the bottom. And then they would take a very large stone and drop it on him. This is not pleasant stuff. But the truth is that cruel punishments, generally, I would say, even in this particular case, the Torah is absolutely against, wanton cruel punishments. Capital punishment is never pleasant. It's never, never something that one looks towards, but to be done in a way that is as quick and as painless as possible, that's the important thing. And
But
it's more the symbolism of this. Yes,
I
Lauren.
mean, you said the Torah doesn't want that, but the Torah doesn't really say what you said just now. It just
Correct.
says they stoned him.
I know. But remember, if we didn't have the rabbis, we wouldn't have the Torah. And so, this goes back into why there's all this oral tradition that goes along with this tradition. So, as I said to Harlan before, we are painting in broad strokes here. But in actual fact, in the application of it, these are the things that I found out about it. So, going on, I did feel a need to explain the stoning process, right? Ki vikesh lahadichacha, because he sought to turn you away, me'al Hashem elakacha, away from the Lord your God, hamotziacha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, mibeit avadim, from the house of slavery, from slavery. This just shows you appreciation, right? The lack of appreciation and what it brings in its train, and just how fundamental it is to remember these sorts of things and to be appreciative. And of course, my sense for a long time has been that the kinds of values we find, in other words, appreciating God, gets a parallel in terms of appreciating our fellow human beings, that we learn one way of love from the other way of love. V'chol Yisrael yishma'u v'yira'u, and all of Israel will hear of it and be fearful. V'lo yosifu la'asot kadavar hara hazeh, and they will not continue to do something so evil. B'kirbecha, in your midst. So, I don't know how motivating these things are, but clearly the Torah is prescribing this to try to prevent any further abuse. And I know that there are times in life where one has to take extreme positions to drive home a lesson, although don't ask me to mention too many other examples. But I think that is obviously here what the Torah is trying to accomplish. And at this point, I'm going to make the marking, and please God, we will keep going. Unfortunately, this particular section is just not an easy section. And I'm going to stop the share. Any other comments, please? I would expect them.
Well,
Go ahead.
if a Jewish person incites you to move away from God,
Yes.
does that not apply?
No, that's exactly what it is, right? It is talking about a Jewish person.
Okay.
It is, because it's
Okay,
talking
I didn't
about your
understand
blood
that.
relative or your close friend, etc. Although, I mean, and then of course, non-Jews would then be,
Right. That's right.
yeah. I have said all along, right? This is not the first time we've encountered difficult passages. And I think it's, at least where I'm at personally and trying to understand these things, is to say, what are the positive lessons I can get out of it? Harlan
For Mitchell.
or Mitchell?
We're talking about idolatry, people that are worshiping idols. Is that what it's talking about?
Yeah.
They're not necessarily worshiping about Jews worshiping idols or goyim worshiping.
No, absolutely Jews worshiping idols. No question about
Ah,
it. No, it says elsewhere that God gave those to the nations, but we need to understand idolatry, okay? And I have 2 minutes to try, or 1 minute and or less than 1 minute to try and explain idolatry. We should not confuse idolatry with fetishism. Idolatry is the substitution of anything else other than, let's just for want of definition or clarity of definition, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that is, and I think that these are cases where the Torah is using hyperbole. That's what I would like. That's the best way I have to understand this. That the hyperbole is a legitimate expression, a literary device, which is to get our attention. And that's what Moses is trying to do. right? So hyperbole says things in a way that should not be taken literally, but should be taken as understood to try and drive home a point. And the problem is that idolatry, which means the worship of things such as money, fame, power, those sorts of things. Okay. That's idolatry. And I've said before, nationalism is an idolatry. If you worship the nation and you don't worship the God who created that nation, that's the problem. Idolatry may be, in fact, looking at things that in other contexts are worthwhile, but only they're not idolatry if you understand that above them there is the one that makes all these things possible. But it's not bowing down necessarily to stone objects. Okay? That's not necessarily, that's fetishism. But it's interesting that Professor Yecheskel Kaufman years ago pointed out that interesting fact that the Torah couches idolatry in terms of fetishism. But I think, again, that the reason why the Torah does that, I'm going to suggest, is that the reason the Torah does that is because it shows how of little value that is. Let's be honest about it. People who have wound up being lured away to worship these particular things very often find great tragedy in their lives. So again, not necessarily. Sorry, go ahead, please,
Could you
Judith.
more about fetishism? I haven't heard it contrasted this way before.
Yeah, yeah. Kaufman makes this point. By the way, before I end the session, I do want to say that I'm not necessarily talking about agnosticism or things like that. Okay. I really actually feel sorry for, people who like to broadcast their atheism. But I think that that's, in fact, at least in the context that I understand it, allows room for debate. You know, I think that belief in God has to do essentially with, and you've heard me mention it more than once, the notion of transcendence. If you're not willing to understand a concept of transcendence, you're going to have difficulty understanding that there is, in fact, this great transcendent power. Because assuming that we give ourselves our intelligence or that we give ourselves any of these things doesn't make any sense if we're really honest with ourselves. We confuse developing. In other words, of course you can grow. Of course you can learn or you can neglect yourself. You can do those things. But the ability to do it, that is something that you're born with. It comes from another place.
Yeah, we have choices.
Okay. Well, please God, for our next lesson. And believe me, I am very open to any comments that you want to make about this, because we do need to kind of work it out. And I hope this has been helpful. Peace.